My name is Dr. Stephen Boechler, and I will be hosting the webinar today. And I work as a psychologist in private practice in Saskatchewan. When I began my studies in psychology, I never would have predicted the direction that my career took. When I first worked as a master's level psychologist in a small rural clinic in southern Ontario, I was the only male on staff. And so any men who came to the clinic who had issues with anger and violence, men who were violent in their relationships with their partner, were all given to me. And thus began the forensic component of my career. I began to work with men who were violent in relationships, became involved in programming, education, advocacy, and was on the board of directors of the local shelter. When I returned to school to do my PhD, my focus was on issues of men's violence against women and children, particularly men's violence within relationships. When I returned home to Saskatchewan, I set up and ran one of the community-based programs for people who commit sexual offenses. And when I moved into private practice, I began working with people with intellectual disabilities who commit sexual offenses. A large part of my current practice is working with people who have experienced the impact of the work, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder, working with police officers, RCMP members, the military, correctional officers, and other first responders. And I'm also part of the critical incident stress management team for the RCMP, responding to various detachments throughout the province following particularly tragic and traumatic events. As I've worked in these areas related to violence, trauma, and brutality, I've been conscious of and involved in discussing with my colleagues the impact of that work. From those who had young children and were either providing services to people who had committed sexual offenses against children or were responding to offenses against children, to those who do the direct responses to deaths, tragedy, and trauma. Over the years, I've spoken to many groups about the impact of our work, mental wellness, self-care, and surviving difficult work. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today. Mental wellness. We all have it. The question is, how do we take care of it? We have lots of messages about taking care of our physical health. Perhaps some of you have a Fitbit. Why do you wear it? Right? You wear it to track your steps every day, to manage and maintain your health, to achieve goals in improving your health. Or perhaps you wear it because someone gave it to you and you didn't want to offend them. And now if you could only figure out how to turn it on, you'd be in business. Well, we do not have a Fitbit for mental health. Today, what we want to do is talk about some of the things that might be on your Fitbit that would measure mental well-being. Things that would help us be reminded of the tasks and goals in protecting and maintaining mental wellness. Do we live to work or work to live? How much time do we spend outside of our work recovering so that we can go back to work? Do we spend our time outside of work trying to avoid work, avoid people connected to work, trying not to think about it? Working in human service, caring for people, protecting people. Where does caring and protecting of self fit in? I seem to have a problem. There we go. Thinking about the impact of our work. Is this our natural state? Or is this something that has slowly come on over time? This is taken from a book called The Pick of Furry Logic by Jane Seabrook. The most important component of your work is you. Today we want to explore some of the things that let us know that there is impact of our work and some of the things we can do about it. So we're going to talk about resiliency. How do we not only survive but thrive amidst the adversity and challenges of child advocacy work? And as I mentioned, we're going to look at some of the impact of that difficult work, identifying the signs, exploring the strategies for mental wellness. And we also touch upon the stigma of being human and struggling. Mental wellness. When I think about this, I think about who is present with us today. I expect what I am talking to, who am I talking to, is a group of bright people who are passionate, who are doers, capable and able people who choose to see and respond to some of the challenges, the trauma, brutality in life. You're well trained, ready to do your jobs. The question is, are you equally well trained to deal with the aftermath? You have skills. People in your organization tell you perhaps how important you are, that someone has to do this work. Perhaps you tell yourselves that you're able to do it, and you are. Part of the question is, what kind of toll do we get from doing that kind of work? If I were to ask you, how are you today? Some of you would probably tell me the things that are going on around you, the things you're dealing with, the challenges, the struggles. And some of you might tell me that you're fine. I usually think that I'm fine means I'm freaking out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. But I tell people I'm fine because I don't want to burden them, and it keeps a little bit at bay from me having to face some of the challenges or struggles that I'm having. When we think about the challenges of our work, part of the stigma is our difficulty with dealing with who runs into trouble. The stigma and stereotypes of mental health, the stigma of not being tough enough. As pretty much all of you are aware, in April 2018, there was a tragedy of significant proportions between the small towns of Tisdale and Nipawin, Saskatchewan, the Humboldt bus crash. I've seen a lot of people who were involved in that accident. Many of them were long-standing, well-respected, strong, competent people within the RCMP. And some of them have told me that they were one of those people who was fairly dismissive and disqualifying about members who struggled with the impact of their work. They've told me that when they go back to work, they will have a different message. But the question is, why would competent, able, kind, good people be dismissive of the impact of their work? And I think a lot of it is because sometimes we're just holding on, and to acknowledge the impact in others opens the door to acknowledging the impact in us. What are the messages in your workplace, or perhaps what are the messages that you give yourself? That people who are affected by this work are weak or stupid? Pretty harsh and unkind judgments about humans doing very difficult work. One of the reasons that it has impact is because all events have impact. Events happen, and sometimes the impact is immediate. We all know people. I know some very good, kind people. For when crisis and things happen, the impact for them is immediate. They're nice people, but they're not particularly helpful at the time of crisis or emergency. You both by the nature of who you are and by your training, when events happen, are able to respond. You're able to do what needs to be done. The illusion in this is that there is no impact, right? Because we coped with it, because you dealt with it, did what needed to be done, got through it, we minimize the impact. Today, I want to remind you that everything has impact. Sometimes that impact shows up later. It's not always debilitating. There are different levels of impact, but the reality, everything has impact. And the reason for that, good news and bad news. Bad news first is because you're human. Good news, it's because you're human. That's why things have impact, just as you have impact. And your intelligence, your training, neither diminishes or changes this. When I think about the things at work that have impact, I tend to break it into three general categories. The workplace, the work, and of course, me. What do I bring that creates impact? We can start with the external two. They're a little bit easier. We can think about the work and the workplace and the challenges they bring. You know, there's a very interesting little document from the World Health Organization that focus on what makes an environment harsh for people. And not surprisingly, it focuses on external things, like an alkali level above pH of 9, acidic below a pH of 5, extremely cold, extremely hot, radiation, hypersaline, under pressure, without water, without oxygen. But these are not the only things that make an environment difficult for people. Not all put our lives at risk, but they certainly have impact. And there are other things about the environment that have impact not only on our bodies, but also our souls and our spirits. The psychological impact, the emotional pieces, the spiritual and the cognitive. Our work environments, are they supportive, collegial? Is there time pressure? Is there responsibility for factors for which we have no control? What is the volume of work? What is the atmosphere or milieu within the office? And then, of course, in the work that you do, there is the content of your work. Sometimes the brutality, the neglect, the tragedy, hopefully sometimes some rewards and costs. All of these have impact upon us as we go through our work every day. The other thing that has impact is, of course, ourselves. What is it that we bring to the environment and to our work, which influences its impact upon us? Yes, what is your role in your functioning and the impact of the experiences from your work? And we could start with thinking about why you chose this work. For most of you, I suspect it's because you wanted to make a difference, that you care. For some, you like challenges. You wanted to dig in deep and do things that were important, meaningful, and challenging. But in addition to the reasons we ended up here, what else do we bring? What are the strengths you bring that help you do this difficult work? Your intelligence, your passion, your skills, your compassion. And what are the things you bring that add to the impact? And I often think that starts with our expectations. I work as a PhD psychologist. I went to school basically forever. I've been working for a long time. And sometimes I can get trapped with the belief that I should have the right thing to say. I should have the things that connects me to people. The people I work with should not be harming other people, should not be harming themselves. They should not die. right? That I should be able to say and do the right thing that makes a difference. And of course, we have our expectations regarding others. One of my struggles is my belief that the court should protect children. And if they only protected children, maybe I would have less of a hole in my belly. We have these challenges partially because we have a finite capacity. And the reality is we have a finite capacity for everything. For eating, lifting, carrying, walking, crying, yelling, talking, running, drinking, even sexual activity. And we also have a finite capacity for brutality, cruelty, and pain. I suspect that some of you at times have been quite athletic. Maybe you've gone to the gym and worked hard, and maybe you've done a quad workout where when you left that part of the gym or left the rack, you weren't sure if you were going to make it to the showers, let alone out to your car or to your bicycle, because you had nothing left in your legs. You knew at that moment that the capacity was done. But you also knew that you could rebuild that capacity with some rest, some care, that you could do that workout again. Even though our capacity is finite, we do have the ability to renew it. And what I tell many of the strong and capable people that I work with, even rocks get tired. You know, we have a perception that rocks are sort of static, stable, solid, and unchanging. And sometimes using that metaphor, we refer to people or ourselves as being rocks. But we know rocks get worn. They get shaped and eroded by the environment and the things around us. It takes time, but it happens. We also get shaped and worn by the work we do. It takes time. Sometimes it's surprising, where it's like we hit a wall. And sometimes it occurs over time. And it's only when the people around us start to point out and talk about how we've changed that we see some of that impact. And when we have that impact, when our capacity runs out, we've used language over the years to describe that. From a war perspective, they used to talk about shell shock, battle fatigue, and ultimately post-traumatic stress disorder. In mental health services, we've used a variety of words like burnout, vicarious traumatization, and compassion fatigue. All of them are saying the same thing, that there is a point when it is too much for anyone and everyone, right? Compassion fatigue talks about the cost of caring for others, also known as burnout. Dr. Charles Figley said, compassion fatigue is experienced by helping people in distress. It is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped to the degree that it is traumatizing for the helper. It is the gradual wear and tear of the spirit, soul, and body as a result of the impact of our work. And more loosely, we've often called it burnout. Vicarious traumatization adds that component of carrying the stories we hear, from sharing the lives and journeys of the people we work with. Stories from those who've been harmed, and stories from those who harm. And for many of the people, both. The good thing is that we can take care and manage this impact. When we think about it, when we think of the things that affect us, what do? What is our first response? And what does our environment encourage us to do? There's a wonderful Charles Schulz cartoon where Lucy has set up her little desk for psychiatric help, and Schroeder comes to her. Schroeder is distressed because his great hero Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony, but he never got to hear it. And that really distresses him. And Lucy's wise and sagely advice is, try not to think about it. And she charges a suitable fee of 5 cents. Well, we've done this for a long time. We've tried not to think about it in a variety of ways. Perhaps by binging on Netflix, having that drink at the end of the day to shut off our heads enough to go to sleep, avoiding people, avoiding the world, and a myriad of other ways to try and avoid so that we don't think about the things that are caught that we carry. If we think about our capacity, we can visualize it as a pot. And when that pot gets full, what do? Right? And the first thing we often do is put a lid on it, stuff it down. And if that doesn't work, perhaps we try and tie that sucker down, maybe even sit on it. And then ultimately what happens is it begins to leak out or it blows out. And both are messy. We think about that impact and how it begins to leak out or blow out. We can say, what are the signs? How do you know you're in trouble? I want you to take a minute to jot down 2 of the signs that tell you are in trouble. I always enjoy doing this as a group. Unfortunately, we can't do that in an interactive way. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to run through some of those signs. Some of the signs that I've experienced, many of the signs that people have talked to me about. Some will fit for you, some might not. What's important is your experience and what makes sense for you. For each of us, the task is to learn to attend to our own signs and what fits for us. So I hope you've written a couple things down, and let's see if there's some overlap. When I think about impact, the first real way I think about it is, what are the casualties of distress, of being overwhelmed? And the first casualty is patience. I think this is what brings most people into my clinic, brings most people into treatment with me, is that they've gotten messages from families and friends, from their partners, about how they've changed, and particularly how it's shown up in a lack of patience. And it is also something that most of us recognize as well. Similar to most challenging things in life, one of the things that often takes a hit is our sleep. 2 basic ways. Those who have difficulty falling asleep because we can't turn off our heads, where we review, we anticipate, going over and over things. And then those who fall asleep because of exhaustion, but can't stay asleep. So we wake a few hours later, perhaps in some physical distress with a heart racing or sweating, or perhaps our mind is going hard. Again, waking up, reviewing, anticipating, going over things. For most of us, appetite almost always takes a hit. I think the world is kind of divided into 2 groups in this. Half of us, when stressed, stop eating, and half of us, when stressed, start grazing. Whichever camp we are in, what we see is the change and the difference. And then, of course, there is the dread of returning to work. You get a couple days off. First day's pretty good. Things start to ease. Get some relaxation. Next morning's pretty good. And then as we move into the afternoon and the evening, the tension grows. Tension in the home. Lots of people tell me who work Monday to Friday that they don't sleep much Sunday nights in anticipation of returning to work. One of those big casualties that shows us something is going on. And of course, we can break these down into the physical signs, right? In addition to patience, sleep, appetite, that dread or anticipation of returning to work, we can recognize the physical cues, that fatigue, tension, sleep disruption, headaches, sick time, aches and pains. You catch everything going by. I suggest that we need to learn to listen to our queasy stomach or stiff neck or insomnia. What is our body telling us? That everything is fine? That I'm just getting old? Or is there something that I need to be taking care of? Our bodies tell us when enough is enough. Our challenge is to listen. Of course, there are cognitive signs. Things like images and sounds that we can't get out of our heads. Difficulty making decisions. Uncertainty and confusion. Cynicism, blaming, ruminating, a changed worldview. The emotional signs. Feeling overwhelmed, anxious, depression and sadness, apathy, irritability. When our moments of peace are rare and our moods are as unpredictable as the wind or the weather, what does it tell us? Besides the physical and emotional, the cognitive, we of course have the behavioral signs. Our avoidance and withdrawal, top of the list. Turning down invitations, not answering the phone, avoiding going out and interacting with people. Perhaps it's an increased use of alcohol, increased spending, increased or decreased eating, pushing yourself in tasks to be done or your exercise to the point of injury, becoming irritable and less patient. We know the clues. We're well aware of them. We tend to see them more easily in others than ourselves, but we know what they are. The counter of all of this is, of course, resiliency and self-care. Making sure that the best part of you is still there for you and the people around you. One of the most important things that my spouse said to me early in my career was that she resented that other people got the best of me and she got what was left at the end of the day. Pretty sure I didn't appreciate hearing that at the end of the day, at that time. Also pretty sure it was one of the wisest of many wise things that she has said over the years. Part of self-care, we can think about resilience. What is the things that help us bounce back? Resilience is the process of adapting in the face of tragedy, trauma, stress, threats, distress. It means our ability to bounce back. The good thing is that resiliency is ordinary, not extraordinary. People demonstrate resiliency all the time. I'm often astounded by the resiliency and strength in so many of the people I see. The fact that they are still upright and moving forward, given where they've been and what they've been through, amazes me. And I sometimes doubt that if I was in those shoes, that I would be moving forward like they are. But the good thing is that resiliency is not a genetic trait, something that we have or don't have. It involves skills. It involves behaviors, thought patterns, things that we can learn and practice. There's lots of information about resiliency out in the literature. And there are lots of different ways that people talk about resiliency. I've taken the 5 basic principles in front of you and kind of see them as anchors or foundations of resiliency. but depending what you read, you will find other versions, other things. But starting with these 5, the first one is about physical health. In some ways, this is the easiest one because it is the easiest one to measure. We all know when we're getting enough sleep, when we're getting enough exercise, when we're eating well, hydrated, taking care of ourselves. It's not always easy to do, and it's often one of the ones that drops out when we're struggling, but it's pretty concrete and pretty measurable. Relationships moving clockwise, connections, intimacy, and trust is probably seen as the strongest resiliency factor for people. That the quality and nature of our relationships helps inoculate us and give us strength in the face of adversity. Do we have people that we are close to? People that we can talk to? People whom we trust? Do we have real intimacy in our lives? Renewal talks about what restores us. What restores not only our bodies, but our spirits and our souls. Positive psychology tells us that we need more positive experiences to balance negative experiences because negative experiences have more impact. And they suggest it has more impact because it touches us at a primal level of safety and security. I'm not sure how they calculate it, but one of the things I read recently suggested that it takes 3 positive events to counterbalance a negative event. So it's in our best interest to put things into our lives, to do things that are good for us, that are positive and renewing. Spirituality. It's interesting to me that in 2019, as in previous years, spirituality still comes up as one of the strongest factors, foundational things that help people get through difficult times and difficult experiences. And to be clear, when we're talking about spirituality in this sense, we're talking about a belief that life is about more than us, that there is a connection and interconnection between all of us, right? It's about a belief in a bigger picture than just us as individuals. And the 5th foundational factor is that of purpose and meaning. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, wrote about his attempt to understand why he and some of the people he knew survived their time in Nazi concentration camps, and others did not. And he wrote that one of his conclusions was that he and some of the people he was with found purpose and meaning in their existence within that setting and environment. Part of that purpose and meaning was to help each other and help those around them. Ultimately, he wrote that it is not the circumstances of our lives that determine our lives, but the choices we make and the meaning we give to those choices within those circumstances. Right? Is there meaning in your work? Is there meaning in the challenges you take on? I'm sure there once was. I expect there still is. And I know how important it is to continue finding that meaning and purpose. Within these camps of resiliency and coping strategies, we can think about some of the strategies that take care of some of that specific impact. And I'm going to shift that focus a little bit because for me, one of the important impacts is the emotional impact. How do we take care of the emotional impact? So, true or false? What takes care of the emotional impact of our work? Eating chocolate chip cookies? Drinking alcohol? Avoiding people from work? Okay. Perhaps we should try a different track and think about what takes care of emotions. Although I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies, I'm pretty sure they never actually take care of my anxiety, loneliness, or boredom. But they do taste good. The only thing that truly takes care of emotions is expression. And as people, one of our primary forms of expression is talking. We can talk in a way that gives us relief, or we can talk in a way that builds things up or keeps things built up. You know, in the build-up part, I think we sometimes refer to it as venting. And you know, perhaps initially in that little rant or in that venting, we do get some cathartic relief. But the problem is, venting, ranting, really only has a very limited shelf life and does not help us much in the long run. When we talk in a way that builds things up, it tends to be very negatively focused. It tends to be repetitive. And it tends to be externally focused, which means we talk about what others said or did not say or not do. And if we look at that, we think about, if this had created a challenge in my life and we were to go to problem solving, what's the solution? Well, because the problems are all external, then the solution is external. What everyone else needs to do. I can only be okay when the rest of the world gets its act together. Not terribly hopeful. I like to think that we're on a journey and our species is making improvements, but I'm pretty sure we're not there yet. And we have a number of terms to describe this way of talking. I've chosen a sort of polite one today, so today I'll call it whining. When we're done, we rarely actually feel better. Or we can talk in a way that gives us relief. And in order to get relief in our expression of emotions, we need to talk about our experience. We need to talk about what we think about. We need to talk about our feelings. Perhaps we need to talk about our hopes and expectations. We need to talk about what's going on for us. And of course, if we were to take this side to problem solving, then the challenge is, what can we do? You know, we've supported talking and expression. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves how we do it has a big impact on the benefit or lack of benefit from it. In a similar way, many people like to write. Journaling has often been supported as a positive way to express, to work things out. But similar to talking, journaling can be something that gives us benefit, or it not. Sometimes journaling gets used as a logbook to provide evidence to prove how shitty we feel and why we feel that way, why we're angry, why we're upset. The evidence to demonstrate it. And it tends to be external and negative. If we are going to get relief in our writing, that true sense of journaling, then we need to use it to express our experience. It needs to be internal, reflective, and expressive. We need to talk about what's going on for us. That's where we get emotional benefit and relief. Expression. The coping strategies for the physical things, pretty straightforward. Exercise. Taking time to laugh, using humor. Taking time out to recharge. Physical self-care. Making sure we get enough sleep. Quiet walks, things that are physical and renewing, perhaps time with our furry friends, nutrition, hydration, and as I've mentioned, sleep. Circling back to the idea of resiliency, a big part of coping is taking care of our relationship needs. We all have different levels of need for connection, but we all have need for connection. We are basically a gregarious species, and fundamentally, we need association with others. When we're distressed, this is one of the ones that we let go quickly because we tend to turtle. We want to pull in, not burden people, and because we're feeling overwhelmed, it's often too much to reach out for others. But we know, in terms of both taking care of impact and resiliency, that we need to find ways to create, support, and maintain relationships and connection. It does not have to be all or nothing. We just know that we need connection. Claudia Black has a wonderful book called It's Never Too Late to Have a Happy Childhood. And in that book there's a quote, and it says, "Recovery is not a solitary journey. Even if you could do it on your own, you do not deserve to do it alone." Resiliency says connection is a strong, strong part of our capacity to manage through the challenges. And of course, we have renewal. This is the fun one. What are the things that fill your spirit and your soul? What are the things that renew you like a good night's sleep? What lights you up inside and outside? What do you anticipate in the way that a child anticipates their birthday or Christmas? Bursting at the seams, uncontrollable. When was the last time you let yourself feel that way? What are the memories you have that bring light to your eyes? And of course, what are we doing each day and every day to experience these things and bring these things into our lives? One of the other parts of coping is, of course, taking care of the tasks that need to be done. How many of you clean or perhaps put things in order when you're feeling anxious or distressed? Perhaps hoping that when you get everything in place, you will feel more okay. There's a place for putting things in order. With distress and avoidance, we often let things build up, and it only adds to more weight that we carry, and avoidance only leads to crisis down the road. Sometimes our coping needs to be to take time to take care of the things that need to be taken care of. There is a place for putting things in order, for problem solving, debriefing, working together, supporting each other. And there is a place for taking care of those hard things that we tend to carry and continue to carry when we avoid them. When we think about some of these things and the challenges and impact of our work, part of our resiliency and balance is about what is positive in your workplace. It's easy to see the flaws, but what are the good things? What are the strengths and the accomplishments? Your colleagues, a belief in what you do, being able to see a difference. Once in a while, someone actually telling you that you make a difference. As I said, it's easy to see the flaws. It is easy to see the struggles. We've well practiced, and sometimes our jobs bring the mud, the slime, the atrocities to our desks and to our lives. We've looked at them, and some days that's what it feels like we work in. We need to know that we also have to make time to look at the light, to look up and to see the things that make a difference. This is where resiliency, renewal, having that positive perspective, finding meaning, finding value. What are the things in your work that make a difference? As much as we started with looking at the workplace, the work, and ourselves, and we see some of the challenges there, we can also take those same three spheres and look at the strengths, the positive things about how your work does make a difference. How it makes a difference in an individual child's life, in an individual person's life. How your workplace and having a group of people supporting the things you do makes a difference. And of course, what you bring and the impact that that has as well. The work you do is difficult. And the challenge, I think sometimes, is to find ways to show the same compassion to our colleagues that we show to the people we work with. And for some of you, perhaps bringing that same compassion you have for the children you advocate for to your workplace and your colleagues. I absolutely know that this applies to ourselves. To show that same compassion and care for the people you work with, the children you advocate for, to yourselves. That taking care of you, protecting you, is crucial to the work you do and to be able to do the work you do, but also crucial for your own thriving and living well in the work you do, and when you give up and retire from this work, that you have still something left for the next 3 or 4 decades of your life. I want to remind you again that you're as important as the people you care for. And that hopefully in today, in briefly talking about resiliency, the fact that we can bounce back and do difficult things, capacity, that we can renew and restore, and we do that by renewing and restoring ourselves. That perhaps someday we will wear a Fitbit that reminds us not only of the things we need to do to take care of ourselves, that measures us taking care of ourselves not only physically, but in relationships, taking care of our emotional, physical, cognitive impact. And also reminds us of the warning signs, catches them early, right? Before the wheels fall off the cart, that we catch those early signs, our impatience, the struggles we have, and we reach out and do something about them. I thank you for the time today. We do have some time set aside for questions and answers. And I honestly can't remember if I gave you this information at the beginning, but there is a little circle on the right side of your screen that says messages. This is where you can go in, click on participants, and send messages to me. And I will take the next couple minutes to look at those questions and try and respond to them with you. Thank you. So I'm going to the message screen and just seeing if there are any questions for me. And I could have reminded you to be doing this while we talked. And yes, we've covered a lot of material today in a very short time. This could easily be a day's workshop, half a day's workshop. I think you know these things because you provide them for the people you work with and you take care of. What I want to remind you again is that we need to do those same things for ourselves. Laura pointed out that it's also difficult for those of us in helping roles to build ourselves up, to receive praise, or to appreciate what we've done. How true is that? How much quicker are all of us to provide praise and support for the people we work with, the people we take care of, and how much more difficult is that for us to do for ourselves? Right? I'm pretty sure at the beginning of the day, for those who have children, you never start their day by telling them they're not quite going to make it. They're not going to cut it. Today's going to be too much. But how many times do we start our own days saying, it's too much, I can't, I'm not good enough? It's a really good point, Laura. One of our challenges is to learn to not only accept the praise from others, and thank you is a complete response, but also to be willing to be honest enough about our own strengths, because somehow we seem to be way too honest about our flaws, and that we struggle more to acknowledge our strengths. We should add that perhaps to the lists of things you could all do in the coming weeks, is to be open to the praise and acknowledgments from others, and take time to give them to yourselves as well. There don't seem to be any other questions at this point or comments. And so once again, I would like to thank you and remind you to take care, that you are worth taking care of, and that your value is for you and your life as much as it is for the people whose lives you touch and change. Thank you.